I've come to terms with a lot of stuff that I would never have come to terms with about my family and my background. Those issues that I had experienced being Italian-Australian. In my early part of my career, I totally didn't at all engage with my family background. So for me to go back and look at that was a pretty major part of my life, to reflect on it. When I did that first show, which was Pane e zucchero, which means bread and sugar, that was a major turning point for my work. Although I'd started to look at things, in relation to my Italian background earlier than that, but was tentative, very tentative, and then I became braver about it. I actually began my career as a painter, and I was painting images which were pretty loaded. I mean, they were extremely loaded, but when I put them out into the public realm, people didn't see it. They just saw them as abstract painting. And so nobody really understood what I was going on about. So I got quite concerned about it, and I thought, well, how am I going to get some of these ideas across, because I felt really strongly about them. So that's how it began. I started using materials to convey some of the issues that I was looking at in my work. So sugar, of course, because I lived in North Queensland, it was completely embedded in our lives, completely, even to my mother's despair of, having clothes on the clothesline and all the ash floating down and making all the clothes black. And olive oil, we live with it, it was part of our lives forever. Very important. My mother would not use anything but olive oil. Then AstroTurf was very much about my grandparents. They left Italy and were seeking greener fields, brighter futures for themselves and for their children. So slowly I built a repertoire of different materials that for me meant something. The history of the material and the dialogue of the material was the important part of making the work. Lots of the materials that I was investigating in the objects that I was making or installations that I was doing then became part of the artist's books. One of the first ones I made that was all loaded with images, and images made out of materials like snake skins and muslin, and images that I'd found in a newspaper. It had sulphur in it, it had ash in it. And so the next book that I made, which was the carpet underlay books, and they were huge, and the word silenzio was used, which was silence in Italian. I was so tentative, even at that stage, about making artworks relating to my Italian background. So, it was one of the first stages of me actually starting to use the language. The language thing is really important because my grandparents couldn't speak English. So for me, I could speak their language, which was Sicilian actually, not Italian, and I could speak English. So I was, bilingual, which was fantastic. And what was happening with me as I grew older and my grandparents passed was this whole idea of language and the fact that I was losing the language of my grandparents. And that was a major realisation for me. It was so important to kind of investigate, to connect it again to my Italian background. I really felt that it was really important to do that. Another way of working that I hadn't done before was object making. The Floccus came out of that. It moved me from being really interested in installation and into object making, and profoundly focused on objects. I do installation and I really like installation, but I didn't realise I liked the object as much as I do. A lot of the work that I did for Floccus were very much this aspect of looking at interconnections, and I guess interconnections between humans and nature. And a lot of the forms have come out of that, and I've been really interested in that organic connection. I collect these things from the garden or on walks that I do, and pick up seed pods, and they're the basis for the work that I make. But the forms themselves would be maybe abstracted. Oftentimes I'll look at a form and how it relates to the human body or how it relates to an animal. Oftentimes I combine these forms together in one shape to make the form itself. So this interconnection was what I was really trying to investigate in those works. It's interesting looking back at the work and think about things that I've done and achieved and the processes that I've gone through to get to the stages that I've gotten to. The story that I've written has been so important for me that I've come to terms with a lot of stuff about my background. And I guess for me, and I often say this to my students, that, you know, what's important to you as a person? What is it about you that makes you you? And that makes me me.